How are you, man? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memory Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record with a past guest of the Virtual Memory Show to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic. As far as how I'm doing, the grind, it kind of has me in its teeth this Saturday morning. It's pretty cold and windy out, and today's a running day, and I was hoping to do a kind of long distance. I missed all of winter because of my injury recovery, so I haven't had to go solo in the cold since I started really going long. I know I'll be fine, but I think I'm getting a little self-defeat in my brain, and that's seeping into other parts of my daily routine, kind of making me question why the hell I'm doing anything. Now, it's entirely possible I have this completely reversed and that the self-defeat is coming from everything else and I'm letting it seep into the running. But regardless, I can't let all that stop me, you know? Tomorrow, Sunday, is my day off from posting new episodes, and although I'll be recording one in the afternoon, if it's anything like last Sunday, it should help recharge me a lot. I'll be on somewhat of a digital Sabbath, less iPad, more books and comics, less looking at data and stats and all that other stuff. Without the skipping a day throws me out of the routine and leads to everything going off the rails, which I was worried about last weekend. Anyway, what I want to say is, like the rest of you, this all gets me down sometimes, but I feel like if I don't push through, it'll only get worse, and I'll start wallowing and beating myself up, etc. And I know if that is one of those there is no such thing as depression, you just got to be tough messages, I don't mean it that way. I just mean that's how it works for me. Anyway, I will let you know on Monday how all of this turns out. With all that out of the way, let's get to the new episode. We have flautist. We discuss tomato during the episode, and author Sato Moughalian on today's check-in episode. Sato was the last person I recorded with in person on March 7th, 2020 in New York City. We talked about her great book about her grandfather and his ceramic art legacy, Feast of Ashes, the life and art of David Ohanessian, which I mispronounced terribly. About 10 days after that session, Sato mentioned on Twitter that she was suffering from COVID-19. Her case never got severe enough to require hospitalization, thankfully, and she's recovered now. And unlike the other three guests I spoke to post-infection, Eva Hagberg, Shahar Pinsker, and Whitney Matheson, Sato went through this solo. So I was glad to find out she hadn't lost her mind during that process and declared herself, Empress of Washington Heights or anything. Because if I had to spend 5 weeks on my own with no one around, I would go completely nuts. It would be great if I had this set up at least to access so you guys could hear that happening in relatively real time. But regardless, going into the call, I was also worried because Sato, as I mentioned, is a flautist, and given the potential for lung damage that comes from this, I was kind of concerned that it might affect her ability to play the flute. And I was very happy to hear she is not impaired like that at all from this. She mentions that during the episode. I just wanted to get it out of the way early in case you two get concerned. Still, having spoken to 4 people now who've gone through this, I'm sort of amazed at the variety of effects it's had on their lives. The intensity, the types of symptoms, etc., vary from person to person enough that, I get why it's been difficult to figure out, symptomology and everything else that goes into this. Anyway, as caveats go, no one's microphone headphone setup is as good as mine, and I'm getting relatively reconciled to that. And my wife came home from a walk partway through this session, so you'll hear a door opening and closing at one point. Here's me and Sato. How are you doing? Are you recovered, or, well, tell me, how are you doing?
I'm much better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I have some dregs of symptoms because this COVID seems to drag on for a lot of people, and it certainly has for me. And it started with my lungs and it's ended with my lungs. But other than, slight achiness, I'm completely fine now.
At what point did you know this was what you had? I mean, I'm a hypochondriac, so I took everything in those first couple of weeks, including right after we met, because, as I've said in the introduction of this one, you were the very last person I recorded an in-person conversation with.
I know, that was so strange. And both your guests that day got COVID. So maybe you were like an asymptomatic vector.
Because I need more Jewish guilt. That's really what we're all about.
I'm actually teasing you.
No, that was my initial thing. First it was you, and I thought, well, that's bad. But the other person that day was fine. But she had actually kept it quiet and mentioned it like 3 weeks later. I'm like, Whitney, that's not actually how contact tracing works. It really helps if I know that everybody I met with that same day. Yeah. As it was, I stayed away from the subway that day, although I also spent the middle of that day at the antiquarian book fair surrounded by hundreds of nerds like me. So, yeah, anyway, I'm sure it wasn't me. But that said,
well, that's
when did
the
you
thing.
know?
I mean, I have absolutely no idea how I got it. I mean, I don't have any idea. But I mean, New York is just rife with opportunities for, microbes to make their way in the world.
Yeah. It's something we've talked about in some past ones of this series. This isn't AIDS. There isn't a disease vector that has like a really specific mode of transmission that you would know if you had engaged in, generally.
Exactly.
This is something that's so indiscriminate that, you don't know for a couple of days. And then in that time, R is much greater than 1. But again, as a hypochondriac, I'm wondering, when did you go from hypochondria potentially to, holy crap, I've got COVID?
Well, it started out with a sore throat, and then, around the same time as the sore throat, it went into my lungs, and there was pain, difficulty breathing, headaches, migraine headaches, nausea, like many, many symptoms, a high fever for a period of days. And I have 2 friends who are doctors who are checking in on me every day. And then there was the teledoc through my insurance. But, we were getting a lot of instructions from the city of New York, like, if you're not feeling well, stay at home. Basically, there were no tests, so it wasn't possible to be tested. And even if one were to have been tested, there was no treatment for it. So I just stuck it out and hoped for the best. I'm a flutist, so I'm very familiar with my lungs, and I was constantly like breathing into the pain and just checking. I couldn't take a full breath for almost 3 weeks, but I could take small breaths, and I could breathe against, the points in my chest where I felt the constriction and pain. So I kept doing that. And it was funny too, because in those first days, those first weeks, people were sending me all these like kind of junk treatments, like, take a hair dryer and blow it up your nose, things like that, which, I could tell that, these were heartfelt, but perhaps not very effective suggestions. So I don't know, it's kind of receded into a blur for me now. I had hardly any energy at all. I would wake up in the morning and there'd be like 8 texts from friends in Europe, and they'd all say like, how are you? How are you? How are you? And I remember just the feeling of exhaustion and, communicating by text or WhatsApp or whatever, and telling people, look, if I'm too tired, I'm just going to send you an emoji of a flower. And that means I'm alive, and don't worry, but I can't manage much more than that.
As long as it's not a lily, that's good then.
Yes.
Because, the funeral thing. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly.
Be a problem. I don't mean it in a facetious way. Given what the rest of us went through without it, and the cloud of uncertainty and all the anxiety and everything, I almost envy the fact that you at least, you had an excuse to be in a state of delirium and exhaustion. The rest of us had to stick it out and I'll just keep refreshing the news to see what's happening.
Well, it's kind of weird too, because, people are saying things like, I've been locked up for 7 weeks or something like that. And for me, the first 4 weeks of this kind of, I don't know, it was just this fantasy, this feverish fantasy state where time kind of simultaneously stood still and raced ahead. So, what felt like 7 weeks to other people has really been more like 3 or 4 weeks to me. I'm really grateful that I'm making a little bit light of it now, but I'm really grateful that I, came through it without horrific difficulties. 2 people I know died. And it also seems to me, like, just looking at social media, that many, many, many more people are dying within my social circles than would be normal. Yeah. This metric of increased mortality, it seems very real to me. There are all kinds of reports of people's parents passing away unexpectedly, or and then the issue with the testing, because there really is such a gross insufficiency of testing. I think we're far from knowing what the real toll of this disease is.
Yeah. Well, now apparently the administration has figured out that if we do a lot of testing, the numbers will look terrible.
I think they figured that out a long time ago. I think they figured that out when the cruise ship was off the Pacific coast.
I don't think the very top understood until he said the quiet part out loud in the last couple of days that, we only look bad because we're testing so much. If we don't test so much, we'll look better. But yeah, I think my day job, I've been kind of conscripted into trying to figure out how to facilitate some of the testing kits. But yeah, it just came up in the last couple of days in a very weird way where I just had this, really? I'm a guy you're relying on for this? So that should give you an idea of how desperate we all are. One of the things to me is just the way people are treating it as a binary. Either, well, I'm not going to die, so it's okay to get it, and then I'll have immunity after, as opposed to understanding, the experience you went through, or some of the other guests I've had on who've actually contracted it and had the worst 3 to 4 weeks of their lives. That they don't get that it's not simply if I didn't die, it's perfectly fine.
Well, I think there's another kind of binary, and that is which news source do you rely on? Because, enough said about that.
Yeah, we know. Now, you mentioned your life as a flautist?
Yes, either
flautist.
One.
Yeah, I never know what's the gauche version of that.
If you want to sound like an American, you say flutist.
Yeah, I tend to go with just what treats me as the lowest common denominator, so people expect less of me. So,
we're happy if you talk about us at all.
See? Now, what you just went through, lungs, etc., how is it? Have you gone back to trying to play? Is it something you have to build up to?
Yeah, for weeks now. I've been practicing again. But, all my concerts have been canceled through September.
I think we'd prefer to say the end of time right now and just leave it open. That way you'll be happy when something actually does come back on the schedule.
Well, yeah, but we're confronting the reality of this that, we really have no idea when people will be able to gather again. We have no idea how Broadway shows will take place again. We don't even know how concerts in small spaces will happen again. So, it's a huge unknown. It's our livelihood. Everything is up in the air at this point. And musicians are, I don't want to say panicking, but it's such a huge rupture to everything that we've spent our whole lives doing.
I'm using the word existential in the actual way, because it is the very existence of what you've done that's been completely torn asunder here. You just don't know what the future of that can be. The guy whose episode is going up the day before yours, Brett Martin, just did this. He does the annual GQ article on the best new restaurants in America, and it just came out this week. And, we talked about whether the magazine would have thought about bailing on it. He'd already finished all the tour of like 25 cities and 95 restaurants and all this.
Wow.
But the introduction to it is it's not the same thing, but in the same vein, that sense that these are people who devoted their lives to putting these restaurants together, to building this experience, these menus, the staff, the place, and everything just gets erased.
Yeah.
There's just this, what do we do? When do we know we can do something? What's the future? And how did I put my entire life into this?
Well, it's even more than that, I think, for a lot of us, and probably for those restaurateurs as well. It's like a lot of musicians, their identity is so wrapped up in what we do. People say, what are you? I'm a flutist. And it's not just that you're saying I'm a flutist. It's not just that, you spend hours every day, like with your instrument, making sound, engaging in that form of expression. But it's also the whole like sort of social communal thing that these people that I've spent, my whole professional life with speaking. And then minutes later, we're sitting and playing together. It's this kind of communion. And it's very, extremely valuable and extremely precious to have this sort of, 1 minute you're speaking English to each other. And then the next minute, you're timing your crescendos, you're making your attacks, you're producing sound, you're blending into their chords. It's just so much a part of our like existence and our way of seeing the world, our way of being in the world. And so it's not just a question of livelihood. It's that this thing that is so incredibly central and precious has just been like ripped away. And there's no, there's just, we have no idea when we'll be able to do it again. Some of us have tried doing things together via Zoom or whatever. It's not the same, it's not the same as sound waves, like entering your ear, like bouncing around in your inner ear, sending signals to your brain, to your heart. It's, I don't know how we're going to recover this.
Yeah. And that's not even just the audience part of it, just you musicians together having to be at a distance, from where we are right now, in terms of having to sit, apart and change your dynamic.
You can't. I mean, you could do it in some very few circumstances in chamber music, but you can't really play orchestral music like that. And, part of the great joy of playing in an orchestra is literally the vibrations of the air all surrounding you, and that you're entering into it. And the word communion just comes up for me again and again and again as a musician, that like that's at the center of what we do, is we have this kind of wordless communion. And it is, I have never like thought of myself only as the person who produces sound or the person who has to do this gig or that gig or whatever, but I have always just treasured like the sensory experience of it. Yeah. And that's kind of wordless communication.
I'm hip. I know I'm not comparing what I do to that level, but it's why like this sort of interaction is killing me compared to sitting across a table from you.
Yeah.
And just because it's the thing I try to get across, and I know it sounds weird or stalkery or whatever, the seeing the other person, not just hearing what they're saying, that absorbing that other person for an hour is part of what I do. When I do these shows, and just not doing that. Doing the voice thing is fine. Talking this way is okay, but it's I guess sort of like what you're talking about with trying to do the stuff by Zoom, with other musicians. It's an approximation. It's the information. It's not like you say, the vibrations in the air.
Yeah. There's no, on the telephone, there's, I guess, it changes the experience of transference and countertransference and all of it. Well, I will say I'm starting to work on my book proposal for my next book.
And I want to say, I finally came across another guest who mentioned EMDR. It's EMDR, right?
Yeah, EMDR.
Yeah, I have to connect you guys after this. He's a musician also.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he mentioned it in the context of discovering a bag of shrooms when he was moving recently and how that's been helping him get through everything. But previously, EMDR was his PTSD thing. This is all on mic, so I'm not giving away anything.
You know what it stands for, right? It's eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
I looked it up after you had mentioned it. I looked it up, and the one upside about doing these shows remotely is that I'm in front of my computer, so I can actually surreptitiously look things up. So when he mentioned EMDR, I'm like, I have heard that term recently, and then I said, oh yeah, Sato had mentioned it. Okay, and I know what it stands for. I'm not going to sound like a complete moron. And then he moved into mushrooms, and that was, that was where that
was
conversation
the end of your
went.
frame of reference.
Yeah, I had to admit to him, like, I have never tried anything like, oh, next time we get together, man. I'm like, yeah, not sure. That's
not if I have to drive home.
Yeah, it's exactly what I told him. I'm sort of concerned that I'd be, dose tripping, etc. Oh no, man, you'll be fine.
I've had since the beginning of this, I've had 3 cups of coffee, and this is from a former coffee addict. Yep. I only very recently started having like any alcohol at all, and only very, very intermittently. Like this COVID brain that people talk about is definitely true, or is definitely true in my case. And it's been hard to kind of pull together my thinking. And I know it's been hard for me to be productive. I mean, I look back on my former life and I'm amazed that I was able to, concentrate for such long periods of time. So, I mean, what I'm actually trying to do now is to regain my powers of concentration.
It's interesting because I had a guest, he's just on the last day or so, Shachar Pinsker, this Israeli professor out of Michigan who finds himself, he also just recovered in the last couple of weeks. He came down around the same time as you, middle of March, maybe 15th, 16th. Finds himself incredibly energized, and he's working on a couple of writing projects, and things are going really well. But he's also concerned that he might be delusional about how well things are going. he might think things are going well. And I don't know if you ever heard the old, there was a study of what happens if you dose various creatures with LSD. Spiders, apparently, some spiders get incredibly industrious, super focused on web building, and the webs are incredibly structurally wrong. Like they just forget. Yeah, they don't make webs well, but they make them really hard. They work really hard at it,
wow.
And the webs are a disaster. So, yeah, Shahar's a little concerned about that, but he's found himself energized and charged after. But that's part of what I wonder about this. It's so unpredictable in terms of after effects. Did you go through the losing your sense of smell or taste as part of this?
No, I didn't. Okay. Although I completely lost my appetite. I lost 8 pounds, which is not a bad thing. Not the best way to do it, but, also not terrible. Yeah. So, okay. But the concentration, that went. And I mean, I don't know if it's not a symptom that gets spoken about in the same list as all the other symptoms, but I now can basically concentrate for about 60 minutes at a time. So I try to do things in 60-minute chunks and then take a break and then, try another 60 minutes. So, I mean, I'm not at the peak of my efficiency yet. Yeah. Although I do go walking in the park like 3 times a week. I know you're always measuring your runs and all of that.
Don't try to match up to what I do. Okay.
No. Well, I will say I was in my apartment without leaving for, I think it was 35 days because in our co-op, we had to have passed certain symptoms by a certain period of time before we were allowed to go out. And the first time I tried to take my garbage out, which involved walking down 1 flight of steps, I was gasping for air at the bottom of the flight. So I realized that I was going to have to make an effort to move a bit more. So now I made myself in those early days just pace 4,000 steps a day in my apartment. But now I go and I walk 3 or 4 miles in Fort Washington Park along the Hudson River, which is really beautiful. All the trees are flowering and little blossoms are coming up from the ground, and it's just stunningly beautiful, not overly populated. So one can sort of go about safely and enjoy the beauties of nature.
Yeah. Being out in the wild again, do you find yourself, well, I don't even know, would you find yourself more cautious about, spreading the disease, or, we all went through the being afraid to touch stuff, being afraid to pick up groceries, et cetera.
Oh yeah.
Knowing that you've already gone through the experience and technically should have some degree of immunity.
No. There's
how are you
absolutely I don't think there's any evidence one way or the other that it confers immunity or does not confer immunity. So I am assuming that I'm not immune. I mean, I'm functioning as though I'm not immune. I'm definitely not sick anymore. I don't think, all these weeks later that I would be a vector myself at this point, or shedding, live viruses or active viruses, whatever they call them. But I'm taking every precaution. I'm continuing. I wipe down the fresh direct deliveries, and I quarantine. I quarantine packages for a few days after they arrive.
Yeah.
So
apparently that's all crap. But we've been doing it too. I don't know if it's just totemic or something. We just figure, let's be safe. Well, stuff comes in, we'll put it in the garage for a day or two.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not convinced that anything is crap. And I think that, if we are to envision reintegrating into some kind of functioning society, that we have to just retrain ourselves. I mean, just as we learn to brush our teeth 5 times a day, whatever it is that we flutists do. I think we just have to train ourselves to be cautious. You don't touch your face, you wear gloves. We don't know how long the virus survives on different kinds of surfaces. So why not just be more cautious? I mean, it's a grueling and horrible disease. So many people have died. More than 19,000 people have died just in New York City alone. I mean, many people in my first and second rings have gotten sick. 2 people died. And then many people outside those first couple of rings have died. So, I mean, I'm going to continue to take this seriously. I'm keeping my distance from joggers, people in the street. If a grocery store, if I see that people are not observing this 6-foot rule, I just don't go in there. Yeah. I mean, I think the more we adapt, the more quickly we'll return to something.
I hope. I've said this on the show in the last couple of days. I haven't been inside another building in 5 or 6 weeks. My wife has done the grocery shopping and we get some stuff delivered. And I have no occasion to walk into anything besides my own house. And it's really weird. Once that hit me, that I was like, I'm inside my house. I go out running. I don't go anywhere else. I don't go into the drugstore or, this place or that place. This is, my life has been constrained in certain respects like that, but I've got a lot of freedom and flexibility out here in the woods. So,
well, I'm trying to spend at least a little bit of money in the small businesses in my neighborhood, because without everybody making an effort to keep them going, they're not going to keep going. And what we'll end up with at the end of this is just big box stores and nothing else. And New York will lose all of its character. So I view it as a kind of civic responsibility to keep patronizing small businesses.
Yeah. Our problem, we have nothing out where I am. Everything is closed and there are not really any small businesses here anyway, besides service places like dry cleaners. So I order stuff, bookshop.org and BB Newirth's husband's coffee roaster in Brooklyn. I figure I'll patronize them. I'll buy coffee from them just so I can make sure I'm always with 3 to 4 pounds of coffee on hand, just in case things start to go under. I've got a few weeks of caffeine to keep me going. But
well, let me put a plug in for indiebound.org. INDIEBOUND.org, which, if you're looking for a book, if you want to buy a book, you go there, you enter your zip code, you can see where you can find your book. And then if people can order books from their local booksellers, it's just a much better thing to do.
Sure. And that's, bookshop.org does something similar, but not as super focused as IndieBound. My problem, again, being in northern New Jersey, there are no bookstores. The closest one is about 45 minutes away, and otherwise
but they'll
it's just
mail
a bunch
you
of
a
Barnes and
book.
Nobles.
You know,
Oh, I know.
If you're gonna order a book from Amazon, you can just as easily order it from a brick and mortar store.
I use bookshop.org links nowadays. I try and send people to other places, but there's a degree that I still get to feel guilt over the delivery guy having to go off and deliver things while I'm hiding here in my house. So,
I mean,
there's a huge moral construct behind this whole thing that really shows us how problematic our world was before all this.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we had some idea of how problematic it was, but now it's etched very, very clearly, and there's no mistaking it. And, we're learning lots of things.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you able to, did you sit around watching Tiger King? Did you do anything to pass the time during your delirium or in your recovery? Or is it pretty much just, trying to read and trying to sleep?
I couldn't even really watch anything when I was really sick, and I don't have a television.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, I have Netflix and I have all of that, but Tiger King was beyond my.
I haven't tried it. I've had a very disparate bunch of guests who have watched it, but I've stayed away from all that. But able to do anything in terms of
entertainment.
Consumption.
You mean cultural consumption? Yeah.
Entertainment's an easier term to use. Yeah.
I've been reading Andrea Bernstein's American Oligarchs. I'll put that up as entertainment.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
really?
not entertaining. It's deeply, deeply disturbing, but it's well written, journalistically written. So, I can read it. I mean, I depending on my level of concentration, I choose my reading accordingly, but that I could read. And, British crime dramas always hit the spot. Call the Midwife is on PBS. One of my favorite shows.
My wife's too. I never know if somebody going through a horrible medical situation, even though it's not childbearing, wants to watch a medical drama.
Well, no, but the point is, the backdrop of that show is the
building of the NHS.
Exactly. Yeah. And, here you have these like incredibly compassionate yet gritty, tough midwives, either young women or elderly nuns who are equally compassionate, going into the world and, helping people fight whatever it is that they have to fight, which sometimes is poverty. So I find it incredibly bracing and consoling.
And have you been spending much time just talking with your fellow musicians?
Constantly. I mean, if it weren't for FaceTime, I would totally go out of my mind. I also did another thing, which is that one of my cousins who hadn't read my book, Feast of Ashes, The Life and Art of David Ohanessian, but had wanted to, I read the entire book out loud to her via FaceTime. We met at 5:30 every day, and I read half a chapter a day, and we just finished the whole book on Saturday, which was such a joyful thing to do. I mean, I think we'll both remember that. But yeah, if it weren't for FaceTime, I'd have a hard time coping.
Yeah. I'm glad, first, when you said that you're able to play the flute again, I'm very happy because the lung damage thing was something that obviously concerned me because I'm a Jewish mother. I was worried about you and what you do. But the idea that you had the capacity to also read the book aloud to somebody is just absolutely wonderful. So, to me, that sounds recovered.
Yeah,
so.
I feel quite recovered. Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's very nice of you.
Basically every guest of mine, even though, as I think I've told you, I assume the moment I leave the room, you all forget who I am. I nonetheless,
of course
worry
not.
about
we listen to your podcast. How could we forget?
I figured low self-esteem carries me a long way in this world. So, but besides just being able to play again with your colleagues, with your community, is there anywhere you really just want to go?
Yes.
Somewhere that would tell you things are, tell me.
Avery Library at Columbia University, the Art and Architecture Library. I'm dying to go there. It's one of my very happiest places. And it's a place that I'm going to need to spend a lot of time. If I am going to write the book that I'm currently envisioning, I'll need to spend a lot of time there. And it's where I do my best, most concentrated work. And I'm going through, huge withdrawal. But I mean, these are like fantasy wishes, because, what I really wish is that I could go out in the street and see people. I wish I could I wish I could see the bustle of New York. I wish I could see all my neighbors who took off for their country homes. I wish I could see tourists coming back to New York. I wish I could see JFK Airport and the flight to Milan that I was supposed to be taking in some weeks, I mean, all of those things. But these are selfish wishes.
It's okay. That's we're all in this together, but at the same time, we all have our say happy place, but we all have our thing that would tell us that we're past it. And I know we're never going to be past it. I don't think we're going to be past
it. I mean, I follow Lori Garrett. You probably know who she is, right? Yeah. She's the science writer. Hey, you should try to get her on your podcast. She's saying that this could go on for 3 more years, some version of it in waves, until we either have like a very, very much more strictly, I don't want to say regulated, but, a way of being with each other in the world, and a sort of communal agreement that we're going to be socially responsible, and also possibly a vaccine, and also is the vaccine going to, be in the public domain, so to speak? How will it be distributed? Like, when all of those things come to pass, then maybe we'll have more of what we're all hoping for, but, maybe a much longer while. And I'm trying to acclimatize myself to that scope of time that, it may not be weeks, it may be months, and it may be years.
Yeah. Being connected to the pharmaceutical industry as I am, that's the thing I never like telling people when they figure, by summer we'll be, I'm like, no, not by this summer, not by next summer either, but keep that fantasy or image going forward, but keep in mind that it's going to be a lot longer just before it's safe, not before it's, quote unquote normal.
Right. Right.
But besides American Oligarchs, now that you're past this stuff, you have time. Is there anything you're just like, this is the reading project I always figured I should tackle?
I'm reading a brand new book, a fascinating book by Nancy Sinkoff, who teaches at Rutgers, and it's her newly published book called From Left to Right: Lucy S. Davidovich, New York Intellectuals and the Politics of Jewish History. Which is, I just started it, but it's actually very readable. And, it's a period of American history. I mean, of course, it's a period of European history that we're more familiar with, but, this is my next reading project.
I figure you need some pulp mysteries or something. You need to decompress a little bit, Sato. That's all I'm saying here.
Yeah. I don't know. I want to come through this feeling like, not feeling overwhelmed, because, as I said, there's a limit to my powers of concentration, but I want to feel like I have learned something at the end, or that I've done something by the end of it.
Give yourself some slack too, though. That's all I'm saying. Just, I took Sunday off from posting these dailies, sat around and read comic books from my long box collection downstairs. And it was good. It was good to not be, reading the heavy duty literature that I have piled up over here, not, constantly putting out new shows. All I mean is you've been through an awful lot. So I'm just hoping, I know this is how you're approaching the world and everything. So,
it's how I'm like re-entering my life.
Yeah.
And, one of the main ways of re-entering my life is reading meaningful things. So
I'm hip. I know. I just like to think that we all, because everybody's on my ass to lighten up sometimes, I figure I should spread the guilt and glory, I suppose.
Well, I mean, that's a good thing. On the other hand, if I didn't find books, into which I could enter, I might be going out of my mind right now. So I'd rather, I'd rather live in a book for a while.
Understood.
Than crack up.
Sure. And I'm so glad you made it through this far. I'm not going to give you any advice on what to do next. So, Sato, thanks so much for coming on. And I hope we are able to sit at a table sometime and talk again, or that I just get to hear you play in person sometime.
That would be wonderful. And, I'm wishing you all the best, and thank you for doing this, and thank you for helping keep this community of people connected. It's a great boon.
That was Sato Moughalian. Go check out her book, Feast of Ashes, The Life and Art of David Ohanessian from Stanford University Press. And follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Sato Moughalian, which is spelled exactly like it sounds. Okay, I'm just kidding. It is SatoMoughalian. And the links for this will be in the show notes for the episode. And of course, if you have this episode, you'll see the spelling of her name right there. Her site is also satomoughalian.com, spelled the same way, no spaces, dashes, or anything like that. You can find links to her writing and her performances and all sorts of other material at her site. And she's got a pretty good Twitter presence. So go check that stuff out and go read Feast of Ashes. I actually got a copy from my mom, who told me last week that she read it and enjoyed the hell out of it. Now, we'll be back on Monday with another COVID check-in episode, because I've decided I should take one day off a week from posting new shows, and Sunday seems like a good day for that. If you want to send me a little update to read on the air, or have something you want to share with listeners, let me know and we'll set something up. I'm at groth18, GROTH18, @gmail.com. You can find my contact info at my websites, vmspod.com and chimeraobscura.com/VM. And you can find a link to the COVID-19 sessions at both sites, which connects to all of these daily episodes. Also, you can just subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show via iTunes, Spotify, or other podcatchers to make sure you get every episode I post. And you can get access to all 370-something past in-person conversations. You can find all the links to that stuff at chimeraobscura.com/VM, because we're all sitting around with nothing to do, and there are 500 hours or so of past conversations there. They might help you get by in some way or another. Anyway, in the before time, as I was saying, I always recorded these shows in person, but nowadays I'm using Zencastr.com so I can record remotely. If you're interested in using it or just checking it out, it's spelled Zencastr, so Zencastr with no final E. There's a free hobby level and a pro level that's $20 a month, which is what I use, but my Patreon supporters more than cover that and my web hosting costs, and I no longer have to spend money on parking, tolls, subway trips, in-show coffee, pie, etc. for all those in-person ones I was doing. So if you can spare any money, don't give it to me. Go find the Patreons, Kickstarters, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, tip jars, whatever, for the artists, writers, and musicians you like. I asked Sato if she could send me some links to music-oriented charities, and once I get those, I'll put them up on the website. But yeah, show them some support the arts as best you can. As Sato really conveys in this episode, there's a whole world of people who can't perform, can't make money, and I'm doing just fine, so I don't need the help. Go help people in need. And if you don't want to help people individually, give to local charities, food banks, etc., anything that will help people in need. If you're in a position to help, do it. Now, I'm Gil Roth. It is Saturday, May 9th, 2020, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Keep the conversation going, stay safe, and wash your damn hands.